everybody.
Hi. So last lightning talk for this little slot from Ludipe. I hope that that's correct. Well,
Perfect.
and good enough. But yeah, you're the head of fellowship at Astra Games, a philanthropic organization funding cerebral games. The fellowship program offers grants and mentorships to promising designers so they can focus on their personal projects. And in his spare time, Ludipe also makes a lot of small free games. And you're here to talk about Pacifist Roguelikes, which is my favorite topic, I think, of this conference. So go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thanks. Before starting the topic of the conversation of this presentation, a very brief introduction about myself. As you've already heard, I'm a game designer working at Astra Games. I joined lots of game jams. Most of the games I've made in my career are pacifist games, and some of them are roguelikes. Two small games that I would highlight here are the ever-changing case of the unpaid rent and adult like. The first is about being a detective. Oops, that's supposed to be a gift, but never mind. The first is about being a detective and trying to solve crimes in order to pay rent. It's a very abstract kind of deck building game. And the second is, let's say, a more traditional game where you are moving around the grid and you have to make it to the end of the month, literally to the end, to the last day. And there are things that are like removing energy from you, and you have skills to jump around certain days. So yeah, these are some of the ways I explore pacifist roguelikes in the past. As you already know, this is a very short talk, and I basically wanted to define pacifist roguelikes, tell you why I think it's a cool topic and why I think we should be exploring them more often, and also a tiny peek about how do we start like tackling this challenge, making these pacifist roguelikes. Let's start at the beginning. When I'm talking about a pacifist roguelike, I mean a roguelike where conflict and solved with violence. And any kind of violence, like even if you have like a very cute characters who are fighting against each other, just bump into them and one flies off the screen, that's still a combat solved through violence. Also, I'm aware that whenever I try to look for pacifist roguelikes on Google, I see lots of posts that are suggesting games that have viable pacifist runs, like Renowned Explorers, but it's not the focus of the experience. It's just like something you can choose to do. I'm aware that there are like lots of gray areas to this. Again, short talk. I just want to acknowledge that there are some things like in Invisible Ink, where like you can ideally like go through the whole game without violent acts, but they're still part of the game. And also there are games where like you are not the one engaging in this combat and in this action, but you are still supporting the entity that is doing that. Again, gray areas that we could talk about in a longer discussion. Some examples, there are a bunch of pacifist roguelikes, but some examples that came to my mind when I was preparing this talk. Insurmountable is a roguelike about climbing a mountain. So they're like it's a survival game. You are managing your parameters and trying to stay alive. It's full of hazards. It's really hard. But again, it's again about a climber trying to get to the top. So there's no, it's not focused on combat or violence. Like Be a Landlord, I think the Steam description was really funny. It was something about like, yeah, your landlord is knocking on the door and you don't have money to pay rent, and you start like messing around with this slot machine to make enough money to pay rent. And The Waking Knot, which is still in development, though it had a few public demos. It was at EGX, and I really like this. I think this game is gonna be like super cool when it releases. It's kind of like a pacifist Into the Breach, where you are moving around this grid and trying to save all these characters and manipulating some hazards that are around. It's a bit cryptic and abstract, but yeah, it's a really cool example of pacifist roguelike, which looks, I guess, more traditional. So why am I talking about this? Why I think we should be exploring them? First of all, because even though there are a bunch of examples, like it's just like a tiny fraction compared to the whole pie that is like roguelike games. And I don't know, like I think that most people in games jump into any opportunity of doing something that is like let's chart it, let's explore it, and so it's like more different. So I think there's a lot of things to hear and explore. And as a fan of roguelikes and as a player of this genre, I want to see like all sorts of games, more variety. So yeah, and as a bonus point, I'd say that it's also a great tool to draw more players into a genre, which it's always like I think like a good idea. So if if that's the good part, like that's the reason why I think we should be doing more of this. Why is this not happening? First of all, like where are we like so like high in combat so closely? Well, first of all, there's a lot of references to use, like a lot of successful games or cool games that we can draw inspiration from, and this makes the design process a bit easier. And designing any kind of game, it's hard. So if we have something that's a bit easier, it's we tend to jump to that and follow that path. It's full of elements that the players recognize instantly. Like I put like a warrior, a goblin on the screen, and I'm like, oh, the warrior has like 5 hearts and 5 swords, and the goblin has 5 hearts. Most players recognize like, oh, this is my enemy, and if I choose to hit them, I'm gonna deal 5 points of damage, and they have 5 health points. Lots of symbols that we are very used to, and it's easy to recognize them. And also, yeah, like they usually have like an opposing force that it's playing against us, so that feels exciting. And when we share them around, like usually combat makes GIFs and trailers flashier, which always helps. So how do we start? Like imagine that you want to try to make more of these Pacifist Roguelikes. I'm gonna suggest like just 2 early ideas. Again, very short talk. We don't have like time to dig really deep into this. But imagine that you have a game like Rift Wizard, more traditional roguelike, grid based, combat based, all the usuals. But imagine that you have everybody in this game is like a wizard, and you're throwing spells at each other, and again you're trying to remove all their health points and defeat the enemies and all that. And now we are gonna replace the narrative. Let's say that we keep the same thing. It's a grid-based game. Everything is the same, but suddenly it's instead of wizards fighting a dungeon, it's a Jane Austen-like setting where like it's people in a ballroom and they are gossiping and trying to destroy the reputation of somebody else or something like that. Or maybe, I don't know, they're trying to find the right romance, and a spell instead of dealing damage is like altering some other parameter, like, I don't know, reputation, or like energy to dance, or like how much a person likes you, something like that. So we would be keeping the same systems and kind of replacing the wrapping around that. Obviously, this is not always possible, but there's a good amount of examples where like you can actually do this and just switch around some variables, change the wrapping, and suddenly you have like instead something that I think feels more refreshing, or like at least newer. This is like the easy way. I mean, it's just like, hey, let's keep doing what we were already doing, but with a new wrapping. Obviously, the harder path is staying away from those references and trying to really lean on these new systems. Like for example, in Unsurmountable, the game I mentioned about climbing a mountain, they are like relying on the whole fantasy of being a climber and getting to the top, and they are creating many systems and interesting challenges out of that. Again, it's harder, right? When you don't have a template, iteration is harder. There's a lot of more ideas that need to be discarded. Like the process takes longer. But I think you can get to like more interesting situations. One thing I was mentioning, like, hey, like in roguelikes, we usually have combat. That means that we have like an active opponent that is like fighting against us, playing against that, and it's like energetic. It's not passive. It's like an active hazard. But truth is, like, not all roguelikes are doing this. Like this is an example. Desktop Dungeons is like an amazing roguelike. One of the parents of the genre. And in this game you have like very very passive enemies. And I'm not saying that you have to rely on active enemies. You can have like hazards or things that are like static and passive on the grid, and still make like a very engaging experience. And the game I was mentioning before, the Waking Knot, this one has active hazards. You can say there's like an active force fighting against you. It's like some sort of fireballs appearing out of nowhere. It's just moving around. It's a force of nature. It's not an enemy to be defeated, but it's active. And the whole point of the game is finding your way around it and trying to manipulate in a way that suits your goal, even though it's like a force of nature. Like it's not something you can fight. The whole point of leaning on your inspiration and trying to, hey, what's the theme of what I want to do, and try to draw more mechanics and systems from that. It's like I think we could be exploring so many cool themes like gardening, sports, preparing a trip, doing laundry, cooking, dancing, hosting a dinner. I'd like to see more creators just like pick these sort of non-violent newer themes and just try to see what new mechanics could come from them. Like maybe you're doing laundry and it's about how you prepare your clothes, or maybe it's a sports game where you are managing your team and you need to hire new people, or maybe fire them, or maybe train them. I don't know. I just think that if we lean on these new inspirations, we can see new kinds of roguelikes and new kinds of mechanics and challenges, and I'm very excited about that. It's like when I watch one of the big game conferences and all I see like 6-7 games in a row are like very realistic shooting games. I'm like, okay, I don't have anything against this, but I don't like seeing like 5-6 games in a row that are like too identical. So yeah, I'm hoping that this inspires more people to play and explore this section of roguelikes. And like I said, you can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, It, and all that as Ludipe. And yeah, that's it. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you. It's really great. Well done putting, I think, a lot of ideas into that amount of time. I think this is one of the ones that will be fun to unpack in the recording and really go through all those references. We probably have time for 1 or 2 questions if anyone wants to put some more in. There's one from Silence Walker, and I know that you touched on this a bit, but that idea of like swapping combat mechanics, if you turn combat into gardening, does that make it pacifist roguelike? I mean, I think the idea there is like maybe, but there's also other ways to do it, right?
I mean, yeah, of course. I was just saying like the very first one, that the most common way that I've seen around, again, replacing the narrative, but that's one idea. The harder path and the more exciting one is just going over there and trying to come up with new mechanics, and starting with some very weird thing like, I don't know, I'm gonna turn Mario Kart into a roguelike, and it's all about learning when to drift and when to use the boost and when to do this. And again, it's iteration. It's harder because you don't have a reference, but I think it's also very exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a cool example of like trying to control a car, which something I saw in the chat actually was interesting. It's like we can talk about conflict as a word, but also like struggle as something where maybe like you can struggle without necessarily having like a one-on-one like I'm conflicting with something.
Yeah, obviously, like conflict and struggle comes in so many ways, not only in fantasy settings, fighting beasts or whatever. We all have like struggles and challenges on every day, and I think it's very cool to draw inspiration from that as well.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question from Hong Wong. What do you consider kind of the bar for pacifist roguelike? Like, do you think a game can mix combat and pacifist concepts and still end up something you consider pacifist, or is it like how much combat can you have mixed in before it loses the element?
So this is like purely personal. This is just a definition I use for this presentation. From my point of view, when I'm on Google trying to look for pacifist roguelikes, what I'm looking for is games where like combat, if there's any combat, is like a 5% of the game, or maybe something that happens during like an isolated event or something like that. At least that's my point of view when, again, I'm on a store on Google or whatever, trying to find this kind of games. When somebody recommends, again, games where like, hey, there's a few options for going pacifist, it's like, that's cool, but what I was looking for at this exact moment was like a more pacifist thing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Here's a really interesting question to me from Meanwhile, which is bringing up, so to adequately shift towards non-combat games, posing the question that we should maybe extensively simulate social, economic, like those kinds of processes instead of just focusing on simulating, combat and adventure. Like, what do you think of that? Like, is there some interesting stuff in that realm?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, like once we step out of combat, we have so many different settings to draw inspiration from. Like one silly thing that I keep coming back to, like one thing that I wish we saw more games focused on is games about planning trips. Like imagine, like I don't know, like something where you're hacking around and the whole challenge is, what do I pack? Where do I sleep? What I don't know. Again, like when you start thinking in other spheres, in other settings, you stumble upon so many interesting ideas. I think that's very cool.
I mean, that's fascinating given that we've had to talk about Oregon Trail, which has a lot of like packing. Banished Vault deals with a lot of like resource management. And then that makes me think of like Unpacking, which is a game about the opposite, but is also like a very fascinating and I think pacifistic game. I think so.
I'd say so.
Unless like putting, a hairdryer in the kitchen is violence.
Again, gray areas all around.
Yeah, when you live together, your partner might think that some choices are not appreciated. But
good point.
Well, excellent. That pretty much brings us to the end of the time. But thank you so much for coming to Roguelike Celebration. It was a fantastic talk.